Hello, Nigerians. We have a breaking news, and this is very serious. Right now, as we speak, the man who wants to take over from President Bola Tinubu in 2027 has just thrown one of the biggest political bombs this year. Atiku Abubakar, presidential candidate of the African Democratic Congress, the ADC, has come out openly to say that if Nigerians give him their votes, he will bring back the petrol subsidy. Yes, you heard me correctly. The same subsidy that Tinubu removed on his very first day in office. Now, before I go further, I want you to stay with me till the end of this report because this story has layers. And if you leave halfway, you will miss the part that really matters. The part about where the trillions of naira from subsidy removal are said to have gone. This story involves the former vice president of Nigeria, a sitting president, a finance minister, and figures running into trillions of naira. And it is landing at a very sensitive moment, right when Nigerians are still struggling with high transport costs, high food prices, and a general feeling that the sacrifices of the last 3 years have not translated into anything better in their pockets. Before we continue, if you are new to this channel, do well to hit that subscribe button, tap the like icon, and turn on your notification bell so you don't miss any update as this story develops, because trust me, it is going to develop fast. Now, back to the news.
To understand why this promise from Atiku is such a big deal, we have to go back to the beginning. May 29, 2023, Eagle Square, Abuja. President Bola Ahmed Tinubu is standing before the nation, delivering his inaugural address, and in that speech, he utters the 4 words that change the economic direction of this country. Subsidy is gone. That single line, delivered on day 1, before he had even settled into office, sent petrol prices climbing almost overnight. Transport fares jumped, prices of goods followed, and Nigerians, many of whom had voted for change, were suddenly staring at a cost of living crisis they were not fully prepared for. The Tinubu government argument from that day till now has remained consistent. They say the subsidy regime was consuming trillions of naira every year, that it was riddled with corruption, and that removing it freed up resources that could be redirected into infrastructure, education, healthcare, and importantly, into higher monthly allocations for state governments. In a national broadcast in July 2023, President Tinubu insisted that he had, in his words, consistently maintained the position that fuel subsidy had to go. For nearly 3 years, that has been the government's position, and they have held firm on it, even as Nigerians complained bitterly about the pain of adjustment. But here is what is interesting. Atiku Abubakar did not, at first, oppose that decision. He was, by his own account, in agreement that the subsidy needed to end, which is exactly what makes his latest declaration such a dramatic shift. And that, Nigerians, is where our story truly begins. Here is what we know for certain, documented and on record. Atiku Abubakar made his new declaration in an interview that circulated widely on social media this week, including a Facebook Live session where he was responding directly to questions about the impact of subsidy removal on ordinary Nigerians. Parts of the exchange were conducted in Hausa, and in it, Atiku did not mince words. He said plainly that he had not in the beginning stood against the removal of the subsidy, but his question now is about accountability. Where did the money go? That is the phrase that has been trending since his comments went public. Where is the money? According to multiple reports of the interview, Atiku said something close to this, that the subsidy money was supposed to reduce poverty and help children go to school, and he is now asking Nigerians to consider whether that has actually happened or whether, in his words, government officials are simply stealing it. That is a direct and serious allegation, and we must be clear here, this is Atiku's claim, his interpretation of the situation, not a proven, documented fact of theft. No court has convicted anyone connected to subsidy savings on this specific claim, so let us separate the two carefully. What is confirmed is that Atiku made these public remarks this week. What remains unproven, an allegation and nothing more at this stage, is his claim that subsidy funds were stolen. Now, the headline of his statement, and the one you are hearing on every channel today, If I win the presidential election, I will restore the subsidy. That is the sentence reshaping the 2027 race.
Let us slow down here because in a story like this, the exact wording matters. Atiku, addressing the fate of subsidy savings, was reported to have asked, almost rhetorically, whether the funds had gone toward improving healthcare, education, or security in this country. His implication, without stating it as settled fact, is that Nigerians have not seen the benefits they were promised. He then went further, promising that anyone found to have diverted subsidy funds must return the money if he becomes president. This is Atiku positioning himself not just as a candidate who will reverse a policy, but as one promising accountability for the years since that policy took effect. It is worth noting, and this is important for balance, that this is not the first time Atiku has spoken on the subsidy question since 2023. As far back as November 2024, he had said he supported removing what he called an opaque and corruption-prone subsidy system, but insisted that the process should have come with stronger measures to protect ordinary citizens and ensure that whatever was saved was properly accounted for. So this latest pledge to fully restore the subsidy is, in some sense, a hardening of a position he had already been softening toward. Whether you see it as principled evolution in response to what he considers a failed promise, or as convenient political timing ahead of a tightly contested 2027 election, is something we will leave you, the viewer, to weigh for yourself, because both interpretations are being argued loudly on social media right now.
Now let's bring in the other side of this story, because a credible report must give both sides room to speak. Almost as this controversy was building, the federal government, through the finance minister, Mr. Taiwo Oyedele, released fresh figures. According to the government's own account, the removal of petrol subsidy, combined with the liberalization of the naira exchange rate, generated approximately 15.8 trillion naira in savings for the federation between June 2023 and December 2025. That is the government's documented claim, put out through an official channel, the finance minister's office. It is a fact that this figure was announced. Whether the figure itself is fully accurate or whether it captures the complete picture of how those funds were spent is a separate matter, and one that economists and opposition figures are already contesting. The government's broader argument has always rested on this, that monthly allocations to state governments under the Federation Account Allocation Committee, FAC, rose considerably after subsidy was removed. Several state governors across party lines have publicly acknowledged receiving higher allocations since 2023. That part is documented and largely undisputed.
What remains contested, however, is the question Atiku is asking. Did those higher allocations at both federal and state level translate into visible improvement in healthcare, education, security, and the everyday welfare of ordinary Nigerians? That is not something we can settle with a government press release. That is a judgment call, and it is exactly the argument now dominating the 2027 campaign trail.
President Tinubu, for his part, has not been silent on this matter, even before Atiku's latest comments. As recently as May of this year, Tinubu spoke about the fiscal pressures his administration inherited when it came into office, describing the old subsidy regime as unsustainable and insisting that ending it was necessary to stabilize Nigeria's economy. This has been the consistent government line for 3 years running, that the subsidy was a drain on national resources, that it disproportionately benefited smugglers and middlemen rather than ordinary citizens, and that removing it, however painful in the short term, was a necessary reform to put Nigeria on a sounder economic footing. Government officials point to specific, measurable outcomes as evidence their policy is working: increased revenue allocations to states, ongoing infrastructure projects, and what they describe as improved overall government revenue since the reform took effect. These are facts the government presents as proof of concept for their economic direction. What the administration has not directly addressed, at least not yet, is Atiku's central accusation, the claim that money meant to benefit ordinary Nigerians through subsidy savings may have been diverted or mismanaged. As of the time of this recording, we are not aware of any direct on-record response from the presidency specifically rebutting that allegation. If and when that response comes, NAIJA News Online will bring it to you, because a story of this magnitude deserves that follow-through, and we intend to give it. Now, let's bring this conversation down to where it actually matters. Your street, your market, your transport fare. Since May 2023, when the subsidy was scrapped, the cost of petrol at the pump rose sharply, and that increase rippled through nearly every part of the economy. Transport fares went up, the cost of moving goods from farms to markets went up, and because almost everything in this country depends on transportation at some stage, the price of food, of building materials, of basic household items followed the same upward trend. This is not in dispute. It is documented, it is felt, and it is the lived reality of millions of households from Lagos to Kano, from Port Harcourt to Sokoto. Even the federal government itself has acknowledged in public statements that subsidy removal imposed significant costs on households, with petrol prices rising sharply from where they stood before the reform. So when Atiku stands up today and says he will restore the subsidy, he is speaking directly into that pain. He is telling market women, commercial drivers, small business owners, civil servants stretching salaries that haven't kept pace with inflation. He is telling them, I hear you, and I am offering to reverse the very policy you blame for your hardship. Whether that promise is realistic, whether it can actually be financed without creating new economic problems is the next question we must examine, and it is not a simple one.
Here is where the debate gets technical, but stay with me, because this is where the real questions live. Almost immediately after Atiku's pledge went public, economic commentators began raising a pointed question. How exactly would a restored subsidy be financed? And what would it mean for the private refining sector that has grown since the old subsidy era, particularly the Dangote refinery, which has become a major player in domestic petrol supply? This is not a small detail. Nigeria's downstream oil sector has shifted significantly since 2023. A return to a subsidized, price-controlled system could create friction with private refiners who have invested heavily on the assumption of a liberalized, market-driven pricing structure. Analysts are also asking what a restored subsidy would mean for other government commitments, like the minimum wage obligations already straining state budgets. These are legitimate, serious questions, and to be fair to Atiku, he has not, as of this recording, laid out a detailed financing plan for how a restored subsidy would work alongside a matured private refining industry. That is an allegation of a gap in his proposal, not a documented fact of failure, because we are only days into this pledge and more details may follow as the campaign progresses. What is fact is this: the promise has been made publicly, it has been reported widely, and it has triggered exactly the kind of scrutiny you would expect for a policy reversal of this scale, this close to a general election.
Let's talk politics plainly, because that is part of this story too. Atiku Abubakar is not just facing President Tinubu in 2027. He is also up against his former running mate, Peter Obi, now standard-bearer of the Nigeria Democratic Congress, the NDC. This is a three-way and possibly more crowded contest for the soul of Nigeria's economic direction. In a race this competitive, a bold policy reversal like this one is without question a strategic move. It draws a clear, unmistakable line between Atiku and Tinubu on one of the most emotionally charged issues in the country, the price of fuel and the cost of living that follows from it. It also puts pressure on Peter Obi to clarify his own position on subsidy, since he cannot afford to be seen as siding with either extreme without addressing the concerns Atiku has just placed at the center of the conversation. Here is the argument in Atiku's favor, stated plainly and fairly. He is responding to genuine, widespread economic pain and demanding accountability for public funds,
which is a legitimate democratic function of opposition politics. Here is the argument in Tinubu's favor, stated with equal fairness. Reversing a difficult but arguably necessary reform just to win votes could plunge Nigeria back into the very fiscal crisis the subsidy removal was designed to prevent, undoing 3 years of painful adjustment. Both arguments have weight. Neither has been definitively proven right. That judgment ultimately belongs to the Nigerian electorate. Since Atiku's comments broke, reactions have poured in from both sides of the political divide, and it is our job to bring you a fair sampling of that conversation without taking sides. Supporters of Atiku and the ADC have welcomed the pledge as proof that their candidate is listening to ordinary Nigerians, and they argue that a leader willing to publicly question where trillions of naira went is exactly the kind of accountability this country has been missing. To them, this is not a flip-flop. It is course correction based on evidence of the last 3 years. On the other side, allies of the ruling APC have dismissed the promise as what they call empty populism, arguing that Atiku, as a man who has run for president multiple times, understands full well the fiscal complexity of reintroducing subsidy, and that this is simply a vote-winning tactic dressed up as concern for the masses. Some officials, speaking to reporters, have pointed to the improved state allocations as their strongest counter-argument. Independent economists and commentators, meanwhile, occupy a middle ground. Many of them agree that questions about how subsidy savings were spent are fair and deserve honest answers, even while expressing doubt about whether a full reversal of the policy is economically wise in the current climate. So there you have it, 3 broad camps, 3 different interpretations of the same set of facts, and Nigerians are left to weigh which argument speaks to their own reality. Let's return to the question that started this entire controversy. Where is the money? Because this, more than anything else, is what is resonating with ordinary Nigerians online and offline. What we know as fact. The government says approximately 15.8 trillion naira was generated in savings between June 2023 and December 2025 from both subsidy removal and naira liberalization combined. The government also points to increased FAAC allocations to states as one visible outcome of those savings, and those higher allocations have been publicly acknowledged by multiple state governors. What remains allegation, not fact, that these funds were diverted, mismanaged, or, as Atiku put it, effectively stolen by those in government. No independent audit report, no anti-corruption agency findings, and no court judgment currently in the public domain confirms that specific claim. It is a political accusation, a serious one, but unproven in a legal sense. What is also fact, Nigerians, by and large, report that despite these headline savings figures, their day-to-day economic reality, the price of fuel, food, transport, and rent, has not eased. That is documented through cost of living data and widely reported household experience. So when you put those 3 things side by side, trillions in claimed savings, higher state allocations, and yet continued hardship at the household level, you begin to understand exactly why Atiku's question, "Where is the money?" has struck such a nerve. Let's bring it home now, because at the end of the day, this is not just a story about politicians trading positions. It is a story about your pocket, your transport fare, your market bag. If Atiku's promise were to materialize in 2027, and if it were implemented, ordinary Nigerians could, in theory, see relief at the pump, and that relief would likely ripple through transport costs and eventually the price of goods. That is the hope his pledge is selling to a tired population. But there is a flip side that Nigerians must also weigh carefully. A return to subsidy could mean reduced government revenue for infrastructure, healthcare, and education, the very sectors the current administration claims subsidy savings are funding. It could also strain relations with private refiners who have invested billions on the assumption that the liberalized market is here to stay, and that uncertainty could in turn affect fuel supply stability. For the market woman in Onitsha, the Okada rider in Ibadan, the civil servant in Abuja stretching a salary that hasn't kept pace with inflation, this is not an abstract policy debate. It is the difference between affording transport to work or trekking. It is the difference between a full pot of soup or a half one. That is why, Nigerians, this story deserves your full attention, because whichever way this plays out between now and the 2027 election, it is your life and your daily survival that will be affected.
So where does this story go from here? Expect a rapid, intense back and forth between the ADC and the ruling APC in the coming days. Political watchers anticipate that the presidency will likely respond, directly or through party spokespersons, to Atiku's accountability question about the 15.8 trillion naira in subsidy-related savings. We should also expect Peter Obi and the NDC to be pressed by journalists and supporters alike to clarify exactly where they stand on subsidy restoration, given that they cannot remain silent while their two biggest rivals sharpen their positions on one of the defining issues of this election cycle. Beyond the political theater, watch closely for any detailed policy document from the ADC explaining how, mechanically, a restored subsidy would be financed and how it would coexist with Nigeria's now more developed private refining sector. Right now, what we have is a pledge, a promise delivered in an interview. What we do not yet have is a fully costed policy framework, and that is something responsible journalism, including this channel, will be watching for closely. Also worth monitoring is whether any formal independent inquiry emerges into the claims about subsidy fund management, because if that happens, it would move this conversation from political rhetoric into something with real institutional weight. Before we close tonight, let me be honest with you about where the gaps in this story remain, because a responsible newsroom does not pretend to have every answer. First, we do not yet know the specific financing mechanism the ADC would use to fund a restored subsidy given Nigeria's current fiscal position. Second, we do not know how a subsidy reversal would legally or commercially interact with private refiners like Dangote, who built their business model around the liberalized market. Third, we do not know whether the presidency will issue a direct, detailed rebuttal to Atiku's accountability question, or whether they will simply continue pointing to the FAAC allocation figures as their answer. Fourth, and perhaps most importantly for many of you watching, we do not know whether any independent body, anti-corruption agencies, the National Assembly, or auditors will formally investigate the claims around how subsidy savings were spent. That would be the development that could turn this from a campaign talking point into something with real legal consequence. These are the threads NAIJA News Online will be following in the days and weeks ahead, and we intend to bring you every update, fact-checked and clearly separated from speculation, exactly as we have tried to do tonight. So Nigerians, where do I personally stand as I close out tonight's report? I believe whatever side of this debate you fall on, one thing is not negotiable: transparency. If trillions of naira were genuinely saved from subsidy removal, Nigerians deserve a clear, independently verifiable account of where every naira went. And if a candidate is going to promise a reversal of that magnitude, Nigerians equally deserve a clear, costed plan, not just a promise delivered in an interview. Due process, honest numbers, and open books. That is what should guide this conversation, not just campaign slogans from either camp. The open questions are now on the table for you to watch closely. The financing plan, the fate of private refiners, the presidency's response, and whether any independent investigation follows Atiku's accusations. Keep your eyes on all of that as we move deeper into the 2027 campaign season. Now, before you go, I want you to do 3 things for me. Like this video if it informed you tonight. Share it with someone who needs to understand exactly what is happening with Nigeria's fuel subsidy debate. And drop a comment below. Tell me honestly, do you believe Atiku's promise, or do you think this is simply politics as usual? I read every single comment, and I want to hear from you. This has been a special breaking report from NAIJA News Online, bringing you the story behind the promise, the numbers behind the politics, and the truth behind the headlines. I remain your anchor, and until next time, stay informed, stay alert, and stay with us.